Welcome to Human Monsters. Everybody deserves a home to call their own. Sadly, for the individuals profiled in this episode, home became a prison and a torture chamber. Neglect and abuse of every kind were a horrific fixture of their lives as they were denied their rights to health, safety, and freedom of movement. For some, it starts with human trafficking, while with others, its origins appear benign at the outset, often in the form of cults and family. The ringleader of such abuse is someone who is charismatic and full of promises. Ultimately, they don't turn out to be as trustworthy as they seem, and they are only motivated by selfish concerns, sometimes to the point of exploiting their followers/prisoners for financial gain. In some extreme cases, the leader is a patriarch of his clan and abuses his own children, sometimes making his own daughters into his carefully crafted harem. One thing people often wonder is why the victims didn't run away and report the abuse sooner. The reason is that the leaders tend to depict the outside world as a hostile and unsympathetic place where their stories would be dismissed as fiction. I have covered a few of these stories in the past, but I have a list of victims that deserve more coverage, even if they have not been identified by name for the sake of their protection. I say protection because there is something about these crimes, especially when they involve incest, that have a way of painting the entire family with the same brush. It's bad enough when you have been raped by your own father. Imagine having the entire community assuming that that is just something your family does, like picnics in the summer. Oh, and something about me. I'm not about to get into the political firestorm around the abortion debate, but I feel that if a woman is impregnated by her own father, she deserves the right to have an abortion. Some politicians believe that women should not even have the right to abortion under those circumstances. They were probably inbred. Anyway, here are some people who suffered the horrors of false imprisonment, often by relatives. The Alvarez incest case. This case was uncovered in March 2009 in Colombia. 59-year-old Arcadio Alvarez was arrested in the township of Mariquita for imprisoning and sexually abusing his daughter Alba Nydia Alvarez throughout a span of 25 years. The abuse began when she was 7 years old. She gave birth to 14 of his children, 6 of whom died because they were not adequately fed and he would not present them for medical attention. More background on Arcadio Alvarez. He lived from 1950 to 2011. He was a convicted child molester and sex offender. He lived in Mariquita all his life, where he grew up as part of a farming family and became a farmer himself as an adult. Arcadio claimed that his abuse of Alba was part of, quote, God's plan, close quote. He must have skipped over the book of Leviticus, which outlines the anti-incest policy of the Bible. He denied having had any inappropriate relations with his daughter, but DNA testing confirmed that he was indeed the father of all his undeserving children. Arcadio became known as, quote, the monster of Mariquita, end quote, and the Colombian Fritzl, a reference to the Austrian man who imprisoned his daughter for over 2 decades and raped her pregnant. Arcadio began raping Alba after his wife died. He would not allow her to leave their home unsupervised and would tell her that their relationship was, quote, God's will. As his daughter/granddaughters began to develop physically, he started assaulting them. Speculation has it that he groomed his sons/grandsons to follow in his shoes in that regard. Arcadio was arrested after Alba got fed up with about 30 years of abuse and brought her 6 youngest children to a neighboring township. Her 2 oldest children elected to stay in Mariquita. She reported the conditions she and the children were living in to a local politician who made the details public. She was particularly shocked by how unhealthy the children were. The investigation revealed that many people in the Mariquita area were aware that things were not quite right in the Alvarez homestead. Arcadio first denied that Alba was his daughter, claiming she was adopted. A blood test refuted this assertion. He also stated that it was a consensual romantic relationship, another lie. He had to be held in protective custody during the court hearings due to the hostility the locals felt toward him. In October 2009, he was convicted of crimes against his daughter and their children. He was sentenced to a minimum of 15 years in prison. He died in September 2011. Anna. You may recall that I covered a case about a feral child named Jeannie who was locked in a room and treated like a pet for years. This case is similar. Alice Marie Harris, born March 6, 1932, and died August 6, 1942, better known under the pseudonym Anna, was as feral as Jeannie as she was imprisoned in an attic in Pennsylvania. She was born out of wedlock and suffered many consequences as a result. From the ages of 5 months to 6 years, she was strapped down in the attic of her home. She was undernourished and could barely speak or move. She and her family lived in the town of Perryopolis. She was the second illegitimate child of her mother, Martha, who was 27 years old at the time that she was discovered. They lived with Anna's grandfather, who was very old school and disapproved of Martha's promiscuity. Anna was born in a nurse's house and was expressly brought to her family's farm. Following this, she was sent to live with a friend of Martha's. A minister considered adopting her, but decided against it when he discovered she had vaginitis. She was sent to live in a children's home at the age of 3 weeks. An evaluation reported that she was, quote, terribly galled and otherwise in very bad shape, end quote. Anna was sent back and forth to children's homes, orphanages, foster care, and back to Martha's family. When Martha brought Anna home, she would avoid her father's wrath by keeping the child in the attic. Anna received very little care. She was fed nothing but cow's milk. She received no affection or positive attention of any kind. There was no ventilation in the attic. She was also kept in a storage room where the conditions were not much better. In an interview with her father, David, he said, I made her keep it up there, care for it, and feed it as a sort of punishment. I forgave her first illegitimate child, but not the second. Martha said in the same interview, my father wouldn't let me bring it downstairs. He said he didn't want to see it around. I had to run up and down, to feed and take care of it. I had to feed it all the time. It was awfully hard. February 6, 1938. Anna was discovered by a Humane Society official after rumors abounded that a child was kept captive in David's farm. To quote the Humane Society official, the child was dressed in a dirty shirt and napkin. Her hands, arms, and legs were just bones. with skin drawn over them, so frail she couldn't use them. She never grew normally, and the chair on which she lay, half reclining and half sitting, was so small the child had to double her legs partly under her. The chair she was strapped to was tilted backwards so she could lean on a coal bucket with her arms tied above her head, which made it impossible for her to speak or move. Charges of negligence to a minor were brought against David and Martha. Due to the neglect, Anna never managed to catch up with her peers in terms of normal child development. For one thing, she had rickets, which impeded her ability to walk. From a report filed on November 6, 1939, Anna walks about aimlessly, makes periodic rhythmic motions of her hands, and, at intervals, makes guttural and sucking noises. She regards her hands as if she had seen them for the first time. It was impossible to hold her attention for more than a few seconds at a time, not because of distraction due to external stimuli, but because of her inability to concentrate. She ignored the task in hand to gaze vacantly about the room. Speech is entirely lacking. Numerous unsuccessful attempts have been made with her in the hope of developing initial sounds. I do not believe that this failure is due to negativism or deafness, but that she is not sufficiently developed to accept speech at this time. The prognosis is not favorable. August 6, 1942. Anna died of hemorrhagic jaundice. Arthur Labinho Hughes. Arthur was born on January 4th, 2014, to Olivia Labinho Halcrow and Thomas Hughes. His parents separated shortly before his second birthday. Olivia and Thomas shared custody until she stabbed her new boyfriend following a string of domestic violence incidents. Following this, sole custody was awarded to Thomas. Arthur and Thomas lived in an annex behind Thomas's parents' home. His grandmother recalled that while he was initially withdrawn and apprehensive, he evolved into a happy, well-rounded child. August 2019. Thomas met Emma Tustin through plentyoffish.com. It wasn't long before she was introduced to Arthur. She stated that they developed a friendship immediately afterwards. When he returned to school after a summer vacation, a teacher noted that he did not present with signs of maltreatment. However, an uncle noticed that Thomas became more authoritarian with Arthur, and Arthur became more cautious about getting in trouble. A teacher at the school observed that Arthur became more and more morose as autumn progressed. She became very concerned when Arthur developed a preoccupation with such things as guns, death, and developments in the news. She organized a meeting with Thomas and Arthur's grandmother to discuss these issues. Arthur also stated that he was afraid of being separated from and killed by his father. Arthur reacted hysterically during a production of a nativity play when the baby Jesus was removed from its manger. Thomas took Arthur to be evaluated by medical professionals in early 2020, but he was not diagnosed with a mental disorder. When the COVID pandemic struck, all schools in England were closed down. Thomas and Arthur went to live in Emma Tustin's home. This after he declined an invitation to live with his parents. April 2020, Thomas got into a fight with Emma and decided to stay with his parents. While there, Arthur told his grandparents that Emma pinned him against the wall and called him a, quote, horrible, ugly brat, close quote. His grandmother spotted several bruises on his back. Thomas decided to return to Emma's home. When he refused to leave Arthur with his parents, his grandmother filed a report to social services about the abuse. A social worker paid a visit to Emma's home and was told that the bruises on Arthur's back were caused by a scuffle with Tustin's son. The social worker concluded that Arthur was very happy and very safe, with no safeguarding issues in the house. Thomas would later state that Emma coached him to lie to the social worker for fear that they would lose custody of both their sons. Arthur's uncle filed a report with the police, to no effect. May 2020. Arthur was often forced to stand in the hallway for long periods of time for what was considered by Thomas and Tustin to be transgressive behavior. Emma would notify Thomas about these incidents through text messages and audio clips. In the audio clips, Arthur can be heard crying for his grandmother and uncle. At one point he said, "Nobody loves me." Emma and Thomas would insult him, calling him Satan, Hitler, devil child, weasel, and miscellaneous obscenities. This while Thomas threatened Arthur with violence. At one point, Emma said to Thomas, "I want you, but I don't want him." By the end of the month, Arthur was no longer allowed to sleep in Emma's children's room and was made to sleep on the living room floor. He was not allowed to join with the rest of the family when they ate and engaged in leisure activities. When the school year began, Arthur was not in attendance. When the school called Thomas to ask him why he didn't turn up, Thomas was always brimming with excuses. On June 15th, Thomas said to Emma, after she had been looking after the boy all day, "Just end him." On June 16th, Emma shook Arthur and banged his head against a hard surface numerous times. Speculation has it that the assault lasted a minute. She called Thomas 12 minutes later to tell him what she had done. She called 999 and told the operator that Arthur, quote, "fell and banged his head, and while on the floor, banged his head another 5 times. Arthur sustained a critical brain injury, leading to his death that night. According to the autopsy, his body was covered in 130 bruises. He had been poisoned with salt, which was administered by Emma Tustin. His injuries were consistent with torture. December 2021. Emma Tustin was convicted of murder and received a life sentence, with a minimum of 29 years to be served. Thomas Hughes was convicted of manslaughter and was sentenced to 21 years. His sentence was eventually upgraded to 24 years, as the judge felt the initial sentence was too lenient. Blanche Monnier. Blanche Monnier was born on March 1st, 1849, in Poitiers-Vienne, French Second Republic. She was a socialite born into a very wealthy and conservative bourgeoisie family. The family was born of nobility that extended back generations. Blanche had an older brother named Marcel. Blanche was reputed for her considerable beauty and never lacked for suitors. In 1876, at the age of 27, she decided to marry Victor Calmier, an attorney that was several years her senior. Blanche's mother, Louise, did not approve of Victor, deriding him as a, quote, penniless lawyer. To prevent the nuptials from going forward, Louise locked Blanche in a tiny, dark room in the attic of her house. There Blanche would remain for the subsequent 25 years. Nobody else was aware of Blanche's fate, and some would even mourn her disappearance as though she had died. May 23rd, 1901. The Paris Attorney General received a letter written by an anonymous party that disclosed the circumstances in which Blanche had been living. The contents of the letter went as follows. Monsieur Attorney General, I have the honor to inform you of an exceptionally serious occurrence. I speak of a spinster who is locked up in Madame Monier's house, half starved and living on a putrid litter for the past 25 years. In a word, in her own filth. Commissioner Beaucheton of the Poitiers police underwent a search at the Monnier family's residence. They found nothing unusual until they arrived at the door to the attic, which was locked with a chain and padlock. When the police requested entry to the attic, the family initially resisted, but the police notified them that they would get consent from a judge to do so if they didn't allow it. When the police entered the attic, they were struck by a putrid and overpowering odor. There was no light in the attic, but with some illumination, they saw a pale and emaciated woman lying on a rotting mattress. This didn't even represent the worst of what was spotted in the room. There was old and expired food, insects, and feces. To improve visibility and ventilation, the police broke the chains on the blinds and removed the canvas from the windows. When shafts of light burst into the room, insects and rodents scattered. Having become unused to light, Blanche recoiled from the sun. She had hair down to her ankles. Her nails were thick and overgrown. One of the policemen described the scene as he took it in. The unfortunate woman was lying completely naked on a rotten straw mattress. All around her was formed a sort of crust made from excrement, fragments of meat, vegetables, fish, and rotten bread. We also saw oyster shells and bugs running across Mademoiselle Monnier's bed. The air was so unbreathable, the odor given off by the room was so rank, that it was impossible for us to stay any longer to proceed with our investigation. Louise Monnier was arrested, but died 15 days later, supposedly due to the shock of having a mob approaching the house and condemning her. After Blanche was released from the attic, her problems were not over, especially when it came to her health. She had become anorexic, which was problematic since she weighed just over 50 pounds. She was also diagnosed with schizophrenia, exhibitionism, and coprophilia, or the tendency to derive sexual arousal from feces. She was shortly thereafter admitted to a psychiatric hospital, though her treatment was short-lived since she died on October 13th, 1913. Brian Anthony McCain. Brian Anthony McCain is better known by his stage name, Busy Bone, member of Bone Thugs in Harmony. He was born on September 12, 1976, in Columbus, Ohio. Brian's fortunes went south in 1981 when he and his two sisters were kidnapped by their mother's ex-husband while their mother was at work. They were kept in captivity for over 2 years. McCain has said that, at first, he didn't realize he was abducted and believed his mother and grandmother were deceased. Brian and his sisters were subjected to frequent changes of address, living in houses, apartments, cars, and motel rooms, all throughout northern Oklahoma. All 3 children were subjected to beatings, sexual abuse, and other tortures. In 1983, the so-called family had been living in the Kaw Indian Reservation in Kaw, Oklahoma for a year and a half. When a babysitter saw Brian's photo in a broadcast of the made-for-television film Adam, they called the number on screen, which resulted in Brian and his sisters being returned to their family. When Brian was 13, he began living with his older sister in Cleveland, Ohio. There he met the young men who would form Bone Thugs-n-Harmony with him. He would later appear on an episode of America's Most Wanted, where he encouraged children experiencing abuse to come forward and report what they were going through. Jeffrey Baldwin. Jeffrey Baldwin was born on January 20th, 1997, in Toronto, Canada. His mother was Yvonne Kidman, and his father was Richard Baldwin. On April 28, 1998, he and his older sister were taken by the Catholic Children's Aid Society following reports of abuse by their parents. Custody was awarded to their maternal grandparents, Elva Bottineau and Norman Kidman. A background check had not been run. If such a procedure had been carried out, they would have discovered that Elva had been convicted of child abuse in 1970, when her 5-month-old daughter, Eva, died of pneumonia and presented with several fractures. In 2000, a woman working for the Catholic Children's Aid Society spotted a small bruise underneath Jeffrey's eye. It was dismissed as an accident and no action was taken. Jeffrey and his sister were kept captive in a small room that was locked at night. The furnace vents were shut at that time. When the children were released from the room to be fed, they were relegated to eating with their hands on a mat laid out on the floor. Jeffrey was not allowed to use the bathroom, and as a result, his mattress was caked in feces. The floor of his room was covered in urine and excrement. He was forced to drink out of the toilet. He and his sister were also forced to eat their own vomit. A man who was dating Jeffrey's aunt at the time and lived in the house said that Jeffrey's grandparents did not love him and his sister, and that they only took them in because of the financial incentive offered by the government. November 30th, 2002. The grandparents called 911 to inform first responders that Jeffrey was not breathing. When the medics arrived, they were disturbed to find that Jeffrey's body was covered with sores, bruises, and abrasions. He was severely emaciated, weighing only 21 pounds. The grandparents were convicted of second-degree murder. Yvonne was sentenced to 22 years, and Norman was sentenced to 20 years. Jurgen Barch. Jurgen Barch was born Karl-Heinz Sadrozinski in Essen, Allied-occupied Germany, on November 6, 1946. He was the illegitimate child of a woman who died of tuberculosis 5 months after his birth. During the first few months of his life, he received care from nurses. When he was 11 months old, he was adopted by a butcher and his wife, who lived in Langenberg. It was they who renamed him Jurgen Barch. His adoptive mother suffered from obsessive-compulsive disorder and obsessed about cleanliness. Jurgen was not allowed to play with other kids out of concern that he might get dirty. This continued into adulthood. She was still bathing him when he was 19 years old. Jurgen was physically abused as an infant and frequently presented with scars and bruises. His mother often beat him in the same room where his father did his butchering. Jurgen was confined in an underground cellar for 6 years. His mother often sexually abused him during the very thorough bathing sessions. Jurgen was also sexually abused by his 13-year-old cousin at the age of 8. He was similarly abused by a teacher at the age of 13. All this abuse did some irreversible damage, and Jurgen began to act out in the worst possible way. He began committing murders at the age of 15. He killed Klaus Jung in 1962. Peter Fuchs was next in 1965. Jurgen's methodology was to invite his victim to join him as he adjourned to an abandoned air raid shelter, whereupon he would force them to undress, whereupon he would rape them. He dismembered his first 4 victims. His 5th victim, Peter Fresa, escaped by burning off the ropes wrapped around him by backing up against a candle Jurgen left burning. Jurgen was arrested in 1966. He was sentenced to 10 years of juvenile detention and was ordered to undergo psychiatric treatment. To avoid lifelong institutionalization in the psych ward, he voluntarily underwent castration on April 28, 1976. The Moe incest case. This case emerged in February 2007 in Australia when a woman who only identified by the initial M for legal reasons informed Victoria Police in the township of Moe, Victoria, that her 63-year-old father, known by the initials RSJ, had raped her, beaten her, and incarcerated her in her own home between 1977 and 2005. Initially, M refused to take action against her father because he threatened to lash out with violence against her mother and siblings. The family had been known to authorities for over 30 years. 3 of RSJ's children with his wife had died, and others had been placed in state care. M disclosed that she gave birth to 4 of her father's children. One of the children, a girl, perished from severe brain and respiratory problems at the age of 11 weeks. 2 of the boys who have survived are beset by serious intellectual disabilities. The third had a critical speech impediment and marked difficulties with social interaction. No father was indicated on any of the birth certificates. RSJ was charged with 83 sexual abuse offenses. DNA tests showed that he was the father of M's surviving sons. RSJ pleaded guilty to 10 counts of incest, 2 counts of indecent assault of a girl under the age of 16, and 1 count of common assault. The judge said to him, "You defiled your daughter over many years on a regular basis. Your offending involved a gross breach of trust. To describe your treatment of your daughter as appalling is a gross understatement." RSJ was sentenced to 22 years and 5 months imprisonment. Unless he dies in jail, he will be placed on the sex offenders registry. His appeal against his sentence was denied in 2012. Mongelli case. Matteo Mongelli was born in 1945 in Turin, Italy. On March 27, 2009, he was arrested for sexually abusing his daughter over the span of 25 years. His son Giuseppe, who was born on 1968, was also arrested due to allegations that he abused his sister and his 4 daughters. Michele and Giuseppe have been considered in the media to be the Italian Fritzels. Michele's 34-year-old daughter was christened Laura by the Italian media. She had been enslaved in addition to all the years of abuse. May 2012, Michele Mongelli was convicted for his crimes and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Giuseppe was sentenced to 9 years. Armando Luchero. Armando Luchero, born in 1942, was an Argentine man who was arrested in 2009 after he was reported for having raped his daughter over a span of 20 years. Speculation had it that he impregnated her 7 times. He is also said to have raped two of his other daughters. The daughter who had his children reported him to the police because she was afraid he would abuse her children. Luchero died of respiratory illness in 2010 while remanded in jail and awaiting trial. Lydia Gardo. Lydia Gardo was born on November 13, 1962, in Maison Alfort, Val-de-Marne. She was held in captivity by her stepfather, him being Raymond Gardo, for 28 years. During that time, she was raped and tortured on a regular basis. The abuse occurred between 1971 and 1999. Lydia gave birth to 6 of her stepfather's children. She managed to escape, but Raymond tracked her down. She was only free from his clutches when he died in November 1999. He had been abusing her since she was 8 years old. She has said that she reported the abuse to police, but they always brought her back home, even when she presented with scars and abrasions. Even when he threw boiling water and hydrochloric acid on her, it wasn't enough to convince the authorities that she needed to be rescued. She still lives in the same house where she endured the abuse all those years, though she cannot bring herself to venture upstairs, where he kept her locked up. She has expressed a desire to meet Elizabeth Fritzl, since she is one person who understands what she has gone through. The Sheffield Incest Case. Speaking of the Fritzls, Sheffield, England, had a similar case of its own to speak of. The offender has not been identified by his real name to protect the anonymity of the victims. One way that he was able to continue the sexual abuse of his daughters over a period of 25 years was by frequently changing address. He would keep them out of school as much as possible, especially when they presented with injuries, which was often, since he inflicted physical abuse on them frequently. The children's mother left years ago due to the violence she suffered at her husband's hands. He began sexually abusing the girls when they were 8 and 10 years old. He would call their names in the middle of the night and would smear fake blood on their bedroom doors while they were asleep for some reason. He would issue threats to ensure their cooperation with the sexual abuse. It would consist of beating them or pushing their heads within the vicinity of a gas fire. The threat of getting burned was very real, and sometimes the threat was not idle. He threatened to kill both them and their children if they ever told anybody about the abuse. All of the children said he dominated the family completely. He assaulted them every day. A change of frequency meant they were abused every 2 or 3 days. One daughter would babysit while the other girl was being raped. He would rape them while they were pregnant. He impregnated his 2 daughters a total of 19 times. There were 5 miscarriages, 5 abortions, and 2 children died shortly after birth. 7 of their children survived. According to his children, he derived a sadistic pleasure from the pain he caused. He would not allow his daughters to take birth control pills. Later in life, his daughters confided in their male partners about the abuse they suffered at their father's hands, and their partners gave them the courage to report his offenses to the police. At first, he denied it, but DNA testing revealed that he was the father of his daughter's children. The women said that though they were glad to know their father was in prison, thereby eliminating the possibility that he could ever touch them again, the psychological damage would likely take a lifetime to overcome. South Wales paternal sex abuse case. October 2019. A 61-year-old pervert from South Wales brainwashed, manipulated, and raped 3 of his daughters over a period of 20 years. He groomed and maintained control over them by invoking what he claimed were magic powers. He immersed them in a, quote, false world, using techniques involving witchcraft and mysticism. He managed to convince them that they were receiving emails from a psychic named Amelia Sanctuary, though they were really sent from him. The messages demanded that the girls have sex with him and other men. He raped his first daughter for approximately 20 years. He started raping her when she was about 14 years old. She became pregnant within months. She cooperated when he told her to tell social services that the father was a boy at school. Afterwards, her father raped her almost every night. He impregnated her when she was 16. She became pregnant with 9 of his children, with 6 surviving. DNA testing has proven that he is the father of all 6. There were 2 miscarriages. There was 1 abortion caused by a tablet given to her by her father. He was very controlling with her and would manipulate her by saying things like, "We are soulmates. We have been together through so many lifetimes. We are meant to be together." He gave her what he referred to as a, quote, witch's ring, close quote. In one of their emails from Amelia's Sanctuary, she was instructed to drink her father's urine. He groomed her to the point where she became convinced that it was a normal upbringing. While he was out on bail following his arrest, he continued to rape her. He pitched a tent near to the beach specifically for that purpose. She became pregnant by him once more, and once more he gave her abortion tablets. She was so frightened of him, she refused to seek medical attention for fear of what reprisals he might bring her way. He raped his second daughter hundreds of times throughout a 4-year span during her teens. He also arranged for her to be raped by another man. He raped in varied locations, like his bed, his car, and in the woods. When the other man raped her, it was in his apartment, and her father watched. She believes that the man paid her father. She escaped from the abuse by running away from home. At first, she was afraid of reporting the abuse for fear of losing contact with her siblings, but eventually she reported it out of concern for what he was doing to her sisters. He has sexually abused one of the daughters of one of his daughters, getting her pregnant, making him the father and grandfather of the child, as proven with DNA testing. He began raping her when she was 12 years old, and it persisted into her late teens. Like with his daughters, he controlled her with witchcraft. When she refused to comply with his sexual demands, he would tie her up and rape her. To negate the possibility of her reporting the abuse, he would say something to the effect of, "Nobody will believe you, and you will be thrown in the loony bin." He raped her in myriad locations, including while he was out on bail after being charged with raping her. September 2019, he was brought up on charges of rape, 36 in all, and for 1 assault by penetration. He was convicted on all 37 counts. He is said to have been expressionless as the verdict was announced. He was sentenced to 33 years in prison. The Linz sisters. Victoria, Katharina, and Elizabeth were withdrawn from school gradually by their mother by devising and establishing a story that their father was a monster. They became convinced of this and took great pains to avoid him at all costs. The result was that the children lived a hermetic existence in quarters that were blanketed in filth for 6 years, from 1999 to 2005. They became known as the Linz sisters because the case took place in Grammastetten, close to Linz, Austria. not far from where Elizabeth Fritzl was incarcerated by her father at the time, though the Lynn sisters' father was not abusive like Josef Fritzl. According to early media reports, their mother kept them in captivity. The sisters were said to have invented their own language, like twins do. Their mother gained custody after getting divorced from their father. She had a mental breakdown shortly thereafter. The girls were aged 7, 11, and 13 at the time. They withdrew from school more and more over time, though supposedly they stayed home of their own volition. The average school has better conditions, as there was no running water in their home, and it was littered with garbage and excrement. The mother was summoned to court 9 times throughout the 6 years after complaints were made by the father, who was a second magistrate of the Court of Appeal at Linz. Neighbors also submitted reports. Still, nothing could convince the authorities that the situation was worthy of investigation. November 2007, the mother, Ingrid L., was charged with neglect and was sentenced to indefinite detention. John Thomas Jamski. John Thomas Jamski was born on May 9, 1935, in Fayetteville, New York. He was raised in the DeWitt district. He got married in 1959 and had 3 sons. He worked in grocery stores. He later worked in blue-collar positions, like as a handyman and carpenter. Over time, he saved up $1 million, which he invested in California real estate. His wife became bedridden due to illness in 1988 and died in 1999. October 1988. John began to abduct young girls. The first was a 14-year-old Native American. He held her in captivity for over 2 years. She was 17 when he released by threatening to visit harm upon her younger brother. She did not report him to the police. Around March 1995, he abducted a 14-year-old Latina runaway. He lured her in by offering to pay her to deliver a secret package. This ploy was successful, as she voluntarily entered his underground bunker, which he referred to as his dungeon. He closed the door behind her and placed a blindfold over her eyes. After abusing her, he drove her to her mother's apartment. He threatened to harm her family if she reported his likeness to the authorities. She went to the police nonetheless and gave them a description. Because she had a history of drug abuse, they did not take her seriously and did not launch an investigation. August 31st, 1997. He kidnapped a 53-year-old Vietnamese woman off the street. She was a refugee and was not fluent in English. He forced her into his car and took her to an abandoned house. There, he sexually assaulted her. Following this, he bound her to a stack of flattened cardboard boxes and drove her to his house. During the time he kept her in his house, he raped her every day and forced her to perform domestic tasks. He set her free on May 23, 1998, at a Greyhound terminal with $50 in hand. She reported the incidents to the police that very day, but they did not investigate, though an official representing the Syracuse Police Department later denied this. May 11, 2001. He offered a ride home to a 26-year-old Caucasian female he spotted walking in downtown Syracuse, high on acid. She accepted the ride due to inclement weather. He took her to his bunker in which she was incarcerated. He raped her every single day. If she resisted, he would burn her with a cigar. He did this so many times, she developed an abscess on her lower back. He manipulated her by saying he was part of an underground slavery syndicate and that the police were complicit. She asked for permission to write to her parents to let them know she was okay. He allowed this, though he told her to tell them she was in a rehabilitation program for substance abuse. The police do not typically pursue reports of missing adults like they do with missing children. John went to great lengths to cover his tracks, which complicated the case. The victim did not feel supported by the police. As she put it, the police didn't believe me, all because of the letter I wrote about the drug rehab. They thought I was making up some story or something. One detective said, the letter was read and examined by the family members of the missing woman, and the family all said it was her handwriting, it was her vocabulary, and they weren't suspicious at all that it was anything other than her writing. So, from a standpoint of us investigating a missing person case, the case was closed. October 2002, John picked up his last abductee, a 16-year-old African-American runaway from Syracuse. He held her in captivity well into 2003. In fact, he took her out for karaoke on April 3rd of that year. This led to another night out on the town. That time, the girl managed to slip away and telephone her sister. Her sister called the number on the call display and persuaded an employee to call 911 after she explained the situation to him. The police tracked down John in short order. The fact that he abducted and raped females of different races did not go unnoticed by legal authorities. To quote the district attorney, all 5 of these women are of different races. I don't believe that's a coincidence. I believe that in his distorted mind, this was another form of collection. John Thomas Jamski pleaded guilty to 5 counts of first-degree kidnapping and is currently serving a sentence of 18 years to life. Part of the guilty plea deal was that his assets would be divided among his victims. The police searched the dungeon and discovered some very foul circumstances. There was a stained bathtub. They were bathed using a garden hose. There was a drain plug, but no plumbing. When water was drained, it had nowhere to go, so it evaporated, leading to damp and moldy conditions. An aluminum pail with no seat was set up as a rudimentary toilet. A clock radio sat atop a filthy mini refrigerator. There were calendars marked with the letters B, S, and T. B stood for bathe. S stood for sex or rape. T stood for teeth, as in brushing. He made a videotape with one of the women. He told her on the tape that as soon as they got the sex over with, the sooner he could tell his bosses, and the ordeal would soon be over. The victim pleaded with the bosses by breaking the 4th wall to take mercy on her. Thank you for listening to Human Monsters. Bye for now.